Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive all about biochar. I'm really excited to dig into this topic with you. We got some fascinating sources lined up.
Yeah, it's a hot topic for sure with all the focus on soil health and climate change these days.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really got me intrigued is this whole terra preta thing. Have you heard about that?
Oh, absolutely. The Amazonian dark earths.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a testament to indigenous communities and their ingenuity. Centuries ago, they created these incredibly fertile pockets of soil using biochar, and get this, they're still more productive than the surrounding soils, even after hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. That's incredible. Okay, so for those of us just starting to wrap our heads around biochar, can we break it down? What exactly is it?
Okay, so imagine this. You're like pressure cooking organic matter like wood chips or crop residues, but without any oxygen.
Okay.
This process, it's called pyrolysis. It creates this really stable carbon structure, and that's what we call biochar.
Okay, so it's like supercharged charcoal, but instead of firing up the grill, we're using it to supercharge our soil.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And you hit on a key point. It's not just about adding stuff to the soil, right? It's about enhancing the natural processes that make soil healthy and productive.
So let's talk about what biochar actually does for the soil. One of the sources you shared, a study by Kesser and Steen, it highlighted some pretty impressive benefits. What were some of the key takeaways that stood out to you?
Well, one thing that really struck me was biochar's ability to improve soil structure. Imagine creating tiny reservoirs and breathing holes throughout the soil. That's essentially what biochar does. Its porous structure increases water retention, so your plants can access moisture even during dry spells.
That's huge, especially with the crazy weather we've been having lately. I can see how that would be a game changer for, gardeners, farmers, anyone growing things.
Absolutely. And it's not just about holding on to water. Biochar is also amazing at retaining nutrients. It prevents them from leaching away. You can think of it like a magnet for those essential plant nutrients.
So healthier plants and less fertilizer runoff. That's good for the environment and our wallets.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. This improved soil structure also creates a thriving environment for all those beneficial microbes.
Oh, okay.
Biochar provides more surface area for these microorganisms to colonize, so you're creating a more vibrant and productive soil food web.
It's like we're building this whole underground city for these tiny creatures that are crucial for healthy soil. And I'm guessing this bustling microbial metropolis has a ripple effect that goes way beyond my little backyard garden.
You're spot on, and that's where the whole climate change connection comes in. But before we dive into that, I'm curious what stood out to you so far about biochar.
Honestly, it's the versatility. I mean, who knew something as basic as charcoal could have such a huge impact on soil health? It's like we're rediscovering an ancient secret and applying it in these modern ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. That sense of rediscovery is something that Kesser and Steen really emphasize in their research. They talk about how biochar represents this bridge between traditional knowledge and modern science.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's get into that climate change connection next.
Welcome back to our deep dive on biochar. We were just starting to unpack that climate change connection.
Yeah. So how does biochar actually, help in the fight against climate change?
Well, remember that stable carbon structure we were talking about? Created through pyrolysis. Unlike regular compost, where the carbon decomposes and goes back into the atmosphere pretty quickly, biochar locks that carbon away for a long, long time.
So it's like we're taking carbon that would have been released as CO2 and just storing it in the soil?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
what we call carbon sequestration, and it's one of the most important strategies we have for mitigating climate change.
Okay, that makes sense. But you mentioned biochar also reduces our need for chemical fertilizers. How does that tie into climate change?
Good question. So producing chemical fertilizers is a really energy-intensive process. It releases a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But biochar, by improving soil health, it actually helps plants thrive with less reliance on those fertilizers.
So it's a double win. Less carbon going into the atmosphere from fertilizer production and more carbon being stored in the soil thanks to biochar.
Exactly. And there's another piece to this puzzle, nitrous oxide.
Oh, yeah.
It's a potent greenhouse gas, even worse than carbon dioxide in terms of its warming potential.
Right. I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
And agricultural soils are a major source of these emissions, right?
They are. But here's the good news. Biochar can help mitigate those emissions by influencing the microbial processes in the soil that lead to nitrous oxide production.
So it's like fine-tuning the soil's engine so it runs cleaner and produces fewer harmful emissions.
Exactly. Less nitrous oxide escaping from the soil, less need for those chemical fertilizers, and more carbon safely tucked away in the ground. Biochar is a multi-pronged weapon in our fight against climate change.
It's remarkable how something so simple can have such far-reaching effects. It makes you wonder why we're not using it everywhere already.
That's a question a lot of researchers are asking, and it's something we'll explore more in our next segment. There are definitely some challenges and barriers to overcome, but the potential is undeniable.
Okay, well, before we move on, there's one thing I'm still kind of curious about. In those initial sources you reviewed, did they talk about how biochar is actually made or what it's made from? Like, is it as simple as just burning wood in your backyard?
Not quite. Remember that process we talked about, pyrolysis? It's a bit more sophisticated than your average backyard bonfire. And the type of organic material used what we call the feedstock that also plays a huge role in determining the final product's properties.
Okay, so it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Different biochars for different purposes.
Exactly. And that's something Kesser and Steen really emphasize in their research. They highlight how the characteristics of biochar can vary depending on the feedstock and the specific conditions during pyrolysis.
So what are some examples of materials that can be used to make biochar?
Well, wood waste is common. You can also use crop residues, manure, even things like nutshells or coconut husks.
Wow, so we're talking about taking things that might be considered waste and turning them into something incredibly valuable.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes biochar so appealing from a sustainability perspective. It's about closing the loop, turning what we often discard into a resource that benefits the environment and our food systems.
That's pretty cool. So if we're not just burning wood in the backyard, what does a biochar production process actually look like?
There are a few different methods, but the basic principle is the same, heating the biomass in a low-oxygen environment. You can do this in specialized kilns or reactors, and you can adjust the temperature and the duration of the process to create biochar with specific properties.
It sounds like there's a lot of science and engineering involved.
There is, and that's why it's important to make a distinction between biochar that's produced for a specific purpose, like soil amendment, and the charcoal we use for grilling. They might look similar, but they have different properties and uses.
Okay, so we've got this amazing material with a fascinating history, huge potential for soil health and climate change mitigation, and it can be made from a variety of sustainable sources. What's not to love?
Right. But like any emerging solution, there are always some challenges and considerations.
So what are some of the hurdles we need to clear to really make biochar more widely used?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll dig into deeper in our final part. We'll explore the complexities of production, the economic side of things, and the need for more research and innovation.
Sounds like we got a lot more to unpack.
Yeah.
I'm ready. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive. And we've covered a lot of ground talking about biochar, from its ancient history in the Amazon to its potential for helping us tackle some of today's biggest environmental challenges.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey for sure. And like with any journey, there are always some bumps in the road, right? Some obstacles. So in this last part, we're going to explore those challenges and considerations that come with scaling up biochar production and making it more mainstream.
So where do we start? I remember you mentioned that not all biochar is created equal, and I want to know more about those nuances and how they might affect wider adoption.
Right. It's important to keep in mind that biochar isn't just a one-size-fits-all solution. The effectiveness and properties of biochar can vary a lot, depending on the feedstock that's used and the specific conditions during pyrolysis.
So it's kind of like baking a cake. You can have the same basic ingredients, but the final product can be completely different depending on the oven temperature and baking time.
Exactly. And just like a good baker knows how to tweak their techniques to create different types of cakes, researchers are working on figuring out how to fine-tune biochar production. To create biochar with specific properties for different applications.
So there's a lot of active research going on in this field.
Oh yeah, tons. Biochar research is super dynamic and it's constantly evolving. Scientists are always exploring new feedstocks, optimizing those pyrolysis conditions, and developing new production technologies to create biochar that's tailored to specific soil types, plant needs and environmental goals.
Wow, that's exciting. But I imagine this complexity also presents some challenges when it comes to wider adoption. I mean, if it's not a simple off-the-shelf product, it might be intimidating for some folks to figure out which biochar is right for them.
Yeah, that's a valid point. There's definitely a learning curve. And that brings us to another challenge, awareness. Biochar is still pretty under the radar outside of certain circles. We need to do a better job of educating people like farmers, gardeners, policymakers, and the general public about the potential benefits and the practical considerations of using biochar.
So education and outreach are key.
Totally. We got to make information about biochar more accessible, more engaging, and more relevant to different audiences. Imagine if every gardener knew about how powerful biochar is, how it can boost their soil and help fight climate change.
Right. That would be amazing.
Right.
But even with more awareness, I imagine there are still some practical challenges when it comes to producing biochar on a larger scale.
Absolutely. Scaling up biochar production in a way that's both sustainable and cost-effective is essential if we want to see it widely adopted.
Okay, so what are some of the hurdles in that area?
Well, one challenge is making sure we have a consistent and reliable supply of feedstock. We need to develop sustainable sourcing strategies that don't compete with food production or contribute to deforestation.
So it's about finding that balance where biochar production is both environmentally and economically feasible.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some promising developments in this area. For example, researchers are looking into using agricultural residues like corn stover or wheat straw, which are often just left to decompose in the fields. Turning those residues into biochar could give farmers another source of income while reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
That's a great idea. It's like taking what we thought was waste and turning it into a valuable resource.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about biochar. It embodies this circular economy approach. But there's another important factor we need to consider: the economics of biochar production.
Right, because even with all these amazing benefits, it's not going to take off unless it makes financial sense for producers and consumers.
Exactly. And the economics of biochar are constantly evolving. Right now, it's often more expensive than traditional soil amendments or fertilizers. But as those production technologies improve and demand goes up, we can expect the costs to come down.
So it's like this chicken and egg thing. We need more demand to bring down the costs, but we need lower costs to increase demand.
Exactly. It's a classic challenge for a lot of new technologies, but there's a growing understanding that biochar has long-term economic benefits.
You mean the fact that it can improve soil health and reduce our reliance on expensive inputs like fertilizers?
Right. And those long-term benefits can lead to increased crop yields, less water usage, and lower costs for managing soil fertility. It's about changing our thinking from short-term costs to long-term investments.
So how do we get people to make that initial investment in biochar, even if it seems pricier up front?
Well, one way is to really emphasize the value proposition. It's not just about saving money on inputs. It's about making our agricultural systems more resilient and more productive. A healthy soil is the foundation for healthy plants, healthy food, and a healthy planet.
That's powerful. And it really aligns with what consumers are looking for, sustainable and regenerative food production.
Exactly. People are becoming more aware of the connection between our food systems and the environment. They want to know where their food comes from, how it's grown, and what impact it has on the planet. Biochar offers a really compelling story that connects with those values.
It's a story of ancient knowledge meeting modern science, of turning what we used to think of as waste into a valuable resource, and of building a more sustainable and resilient future for everyone. And that brings me to my final question. What's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with from this deep dive?
I hope they'll remember that biochar is more than just a way to improve our soil. It's a symbol of hope, innovation, and possibility. It's a reminder that we have the power to turn challenges into opportunities and create a world where nothing goes to waste.
I love that. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into the world of biochar. We've explored its potential, its challenges, and its power to inspire. So for our listeners who want to keep exploring, where can they go to learn more and get involved?
There are tons of great resources online. The International Biochar Initiative is a great place to start. They've got a ton of information on everything biochar, from the science to practical guides for production and application.
And don't forget to check out your own community. There might be biochar projects happening right in your own backyard.
You never know. Farmers markets, community gardens, and even some universities are exploring biochar. So don't be shy, ask questions, and get involved.
And of course, keep the conversation going online. Share your thoughts, your questions, your biochar discoveries with us using the hashtag #BioCharDeepDive. We'd love to hear about your biochar adventures. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those gardens growing. All right, welcome back. So glad you could join us for another deep dive.
Yeah.
We've been digging into this whole biochar thing.
Yeah.
And last time we were looking at, what it actually is and kind of the potential benefits.
Yeah.
But now I think it's time to get a little bit more skeptical maybe.
Right.
Because you walk into a garden store, you go online, and you're just bombarded with all these different biochar products.
Oh, yeah, it's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, yeah. And part of me just wants to grab the most expensive one, thinking, well, that must be the best.
Right.
But I have a feeling that might not be the smartest approach.
Probably not the best strategy.
No. So that's why we've got you here today, to kind of help us sift through the hype and figure out what's really going on with biochar effectiveness.
Happy to be here. Yeah, it's definitely a wild west out there right now.
It is. It is. So how do WE, the everyday gardeners, just trying to grow some good food and beautiful flowers, how do we figure out if these products are actually worth the money?
Yeah, that's the key question, right? And it's something that Kesser and Steen, those two students we've been talking about, they really hit on this in their research, this idea that there are a lot of half-truths and oversimplifications floating around.
Okay, so we need to be a little bit cautious, a little bit critical.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, one thing that they mentioned that I found really fascinating was this whole thing about calcium.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying that you look at the description of a lot of these biochar products, and it doesn't say anything about calcium.
Right. It's often completely omitted.
Like it's some kind of secret ingredient.
It is curious, isn't it? And it's actually not a minor detail. Calcium plays a huge role in plant health.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Especially when it comes to building strong cell walls.
Hmm.
And it also really impacts soil pH, which of course affects nutrient availability.
So it's not just about what's in the biochar itself. It's about how it interacts with the soil.
Thanks.
Okay, so now I'm even more intrigued. Like, why would they leave that out? Is this some sort of, marketing ploy? Or are people just not understanding biochar?
I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might just be a lack of awareness. Maybe they just don't realize how important it is. But then there's also the possibility that some sellers might be intentionally downplaying the calcium content.
Why would they do that?
Well, think about it. Certain types of biochar can raise soil pH.
Okay.
And that's not always a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Depends on what you're growing.
It's like almost like they're trying to simplify things too much to make a quick sale.
Yeah, kind of dumbing it down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. And that actually makes me think about all those claims we see about, vitalizing biochar.
Right.
Like, do we really need to be mixing it with, microorganisms or, I can't believe I'm even saying
Yeah, you go on.
urine.
Before we add it to our gardens.
Oh, the things people do for their plants.
But yeah, this whole concept of vitalizing biochar.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There are some legitimate reasons to want to enhance the microbial activity.
Okay.
But the way it's often marketed, it does feel a bit like a sales tactic, doesn't it? Like they're trying to create a need for something that might not be necessary.
So they're trying to upsell us.
Yeah.
When really we could just go with the basic model.
Often, yeah. A good quality biochar is going to attract those beneficial microbes over time, naturally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, speaking of kind of, these questionable claims.
Yeah.
Kesser and Steen actually share this pretty funny anecdote about a fish farm they visited.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Well, apparently this fish farm was promoting their waste product.
Really?
Yeah, as biochar.
Fish poop biochar.
Yeah. Well, they had cleaned it with crushed charcoal, so they were calling it biochar.
Interesting. I mean, technically anything that's gone through pyrolysis can be considered biochar. But the real question is, does it have the properties and the benefits that we're looking for in a high-quality biochar?
Right.
And that's where things get a little murky.
Yeah, and I guess it also raises questions about, sustainable fish farming.
Absolutely.
And whether this is, a genuine attempt at being resourceful or if it's kind of greenwashing.
Yeah, good point.
So, okay, we're seeing that there's a lot more to this biochar thing than meets the eye.
Definitely.
But let's not forget about the genuine benefits. The things that got us excited about biochar in the first place.
Right.
So what does the research actually say about how biochar can improve our gardens?
Well, there's actually quite a bit of solid scientific evidence out there.
Okay.
And it points to some pretty amazing benefits. So first of all, biochar can act as a carbon sink.
Okay, so that's good for the environment.
Yeah, it helps sequester carbon in the soil, which can help combat climate change.
Fantastic.
It can also significantly improve soil structure. For example, it can make clay soil drain better, and it can help sandy soil retain more water.
Oh, that's great.
And then for us gardeners, probably the most exciting benefit is that it can really boost nutrient availability for our plants.
Okay, now that's what I like to hear. But you just said high-quality biochar.
Right.
Does that mean that not all biochar is created equal?
You're catching on quickly. It's a really important point.
Okay.
The source material and the production method can have a huge impact on biochar's properties and effectiveness.
So break that down for me. What are the key things that we need to be aware of?
Well, first, let's talk about pyrolysis.
Okay.
So this is basically the process of heating the biomass
Okay.
in a low oxygen environment. And this is what transforms it into that charcoal-like substance that we know as biochar.
Gotcha.
But the temperature and the duration of this pyrolysis process can actually change the final product quite a bit.
Oh, interesting.
For instance, biochar made from wood tends to have a higher porosity, which means it can hold water better. But biochar made from manure might be richer in nutrients, but it might have less carbon.
So it's kind of like choosing the right fertilizer.
Exactly.
You wouldn't use the same fertilizer for tomatoes as you would for blueberries.
Absolutely. And just like with fertilizer, the effectiveness of biochar really depends on your soil type.
Okay.
And that's where things get personal for our listeners.
Right.
What kind of soil do you have in your garden?
Yeah.
Is it sandy? Is it clay heavy? Is it loamy? Knowing your soil type is absolutely key for choosing the right biochar.
Okay, so listener, take a moment.
Yeah,
Think about your own garden. What are you working with? Because this is really important.
it is.
Okay, so we've got source material, we've got production method, we've got soil type. Is there anything else that we need to be thinking about before we run off to the store and buy a bag of biochar?
You know, there is one more thing that we should touch on, and that's the issue of contamination.
Okay.
We can't ignore the fact that if biochar is made from polluted biomass,
Yeah.
like wood that's been treated with chemicals or industrial waste,
Right.
it can actually introduce harmful substances into your soil.
Yikes. Yeah, that's not what we want.
Definitely not. So it's really important to research the sourcing and the production methods of any biochar product you're considering.
Okay, so we've got to do our homework.
Yeah, a little bit of detective work is required.
All right, I have to say, I'm feeling a lot more empowered to make informed choices about biochar now.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, this has been really helpful, but we've only just scratched the surface, right?
Yeah, we've laid the groundwork.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to get even more practical.
Right, we'll talk about actually choosing the right biochar for your specific needs.
Okay.
And we'll debunk a few more of those marketing myths that can really lead you astray.
Oh, I can't wait. Stay tuned, listeners, because we're about to equip you with all the knowledge you need to become a biochar pro. All right, welcome back to our biochar deep dive. Ready to keep going?
Absolutely. Let's dive right in.
Okay, so we've talked about, the science, the marketing myths, all that good stuff. Now I'm ready to get my hands dirty.
Oh.
But I'm looking online at all these different biochar products.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, to be honest.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So,
Yeah.
So where do we even begin? Like, how do we narrow down our options?
Well, a good starting point is to think back to those key factors we discussed.
Okay.
The source material, the production method, and of course, your specific soil type. So let's start by delving a little deeper into source materials.
Okay.
We've talked about wood, we've talked about manure,
Yeah.
but what other options are out there?
Yeah, because it feels like, there's always something new popping up, especially in the world of gardening.
That's true. Innovation never stops.
Right.
So besides wood and manure, you might find biochar made from agricultural residues like corn stalks, rice husks.
Okay.
Even things like yard trimmings can be transformed into biochar. So there's a wide range of possibilities, and each source material brings its own unique characteristics to the final product.
So how do we know which one is best for our garden? I mean, is it as simple as, okay, wood biochar for trees, manure biochar for veggies?
I wish it were that easy. It's a good instinct to try to make those connections,
Yeah.
but it's not quite that straightforward.
Okay.
The real key is matching the biochar's properties to your soil's needs.
Gotcha.
Remember, biochar is a tool. It helps us achieve our gardening goals, and those goals might be different for everyone.
So give us some examples. Like what kind of goals are we talking about?
Okay, so let's say you have really heavy clay soil,
Okay.
struggling with drainage.
Yeah.
You'd want to focus on a biochar that has high porosity to improve that drainage and aeration. And wood biochar often fits that bill.
Gotcha.
On the other hand, if you've got sandy soil that just can't hold on to moisture,
Yeah.
a biochar with higher surface area might be a better choice. So things like manure or agricultural residues could be good options.
I see. So it's all about figuring out what your soil's weaknesses are
Exactly.
and finding a biochar that kind of complements its strengths.
Oh, got it. It's like a matchmaking game for your soil.
I like that. Okay, source material, check.
All right.
Now, remind me about production methods. We talked about pyrolysis, right?
Yes, pyrolysis. It's essentially the heart of biochar production.
Right.
It involves heating the biomass in a low oxygen environment,
Yeah.
and this breaks it down into charcoal, bio-oil, and syngas. But here's the kicker. The temperature and the duration of that pyrolysis process, those can really affect the final biochar product.
Okay, so is there like an ideal temperature, like a sweet spot for pyrolysis?
It would be nice if it were that simple,
Yeah.
but it's not quite like that. Think of it like baking bread.
Okay.
You adjust the oven temperature and it changes the final product, right?
Right.
Higher pyrolysis temperatures, those tend to create a biochar that's more stable, more rich in carbon. This is great for long-term carbon sequestration, soil building.
Sure.
But lower temperatures, those can actually yield a biochar that's richer in nutrients, which might be more beneficial for short-term plant growth.
So there's like a trade-off
Yeah.
between stability and nutrient availability.
Exactly. And this is where your gardening goals come into play again.
Okay.
Are you looking for that quick boost for your plants this season?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you in it for the long haul?
Yeah.
Building that healthy, resilient soil for years to come.
Right.
Understanding that impact of the pyrolysis temperature can help you choose the biochar that aligns with your goals.
I see. Okay, so we've talked about source material, production methods, how pyrolysis affects things. But how do we as consumers actually get this information? Do we have to like call up every biochar company and be like, hey, what's your pyrolysis temperature?
You might be surprised.
Yeah.
A lot of reputable suppliers are becoming much more transparent about their production methods. Look for information on their website on the source material, the
Right.
pyrolysis temperature, and any certifications they might have.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to reach out to them directly.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Good point.
A good supplier should be happy to educate you about their process and help you choose the right product.
That's great advice. Okay, so we've covered source material, production methods, soil types, all that good stuff. We're becoming quite the biochar detectives.
You got it.
But before we move on, didn't we touch on some marketing myths to watch out for?
Yes, good catch. There are definitely some red flags out there.
Like what?
Well, one common one is this idea that a particular biochar is like a miracle cure for all soil problems.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
It's really important to remember that biochar is a tool.
Right.
Powerful tool, no doubt, but it's not a magic wand.
Right. It's not going to instantly solve all our problems.
Exactly. You still got to put in the work.
Yeah. No slacking off on good gardening practices just because we're using biochar.
Exactly. And another myth to watch out for is this idea that you need to buy activated or charged biochar.
Oh.
These terms are often used to make a product seem more valuable or complex than it needs to be.
Yeah.
Remember, a good quality biochar, it's going to attract those beneficial microbes naturally over time.
So no need to pay extra for the fancy marketing terms.
Exactly. Stick to the fundamentals.
Okay. Source material, production method, soil compatibility.
You got it.
Okay. This is all incredibly helpful. I'm starting to feel like I can actually make an informed decision about biochar.
That's great to hear.
So what's next? Where do we go from here?
Well, now that you know how to choose the right biochar, let's talk about how to actually use it effectively in your garden.
Okay.
We'll cover application rates, different methods, and some additional tips to really maximize those benefits.
Sounds good to me. All right, listeners, stay tuned for the final part of our biochar deep dive. We'll put all this knowledge into action. Okay, welcome back for the final part of our biochar journey.
Yeah, we're ready to wrap things up.
I'm ready to actually get out there and use this stuff.
Okay, let's do it.
But first we got to talk about how much to use.
Right, application rates.
Yeah. There's like a magic number, one size fits all.
I wish it were that simple.
Yeah.
There's no magic number when it comes to biochar. The ideal amount really depends on a few factors.
Okay, like what?
Your soil type, obviously.
Right.
The specific biochar you've chosen, and what you're hoping to achieve in your garden.
So our soil's needs, the biochar we're using, and our goals. That makes sense, but it also sounds a bit overwhelming.
It can be a little tricky to figure out at first.
Yeah, is there like a good rule of thumb?
Yeah.
A starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. A good general guideline is to aim for around 5–10% biochar by volume.
Okay.
So imagine you've got a raised bed that's about 10 cubic feet.
Okay.
You'd need about half a cubic foot to a full cubic foot of biochar.
Okay, I can picture that. That helps. But now I'm picturing myself with a bag of biochar standing over my raised bed. And I'm like, how do I actually get this in the soil? Do I just sprinkle it on top like, I don't know, soil confetti?
I love the image of soil confetti,
Yeah.
but I'm afraid it's not quite that straightforward.
Okay.
For the best results, you want to mix the biochar into the top few inches of soil.
Okay.
If you have a small bed, you can do it by hand.
Yeah.
But for larger areas, a tiller can be your best friend.
Gotcha. So get in there, mix it up, make sure it's evenly distributed. No confetti-style sprinkling allowed.
Exactly.
Okay. Are there any other tips or tricks for maximizing the effectiveness of our biochar application?
There's one more technique that's often recommended,
Hi.
and that's charging or inoculating the biochar.
Wait, hold on. Didn't we debunk that myth about needing to buy activated biochar?
Yes, we did.
I'm a little confused now.
Good point. So what we're talking about here is not those special treatments or additives. We're simply talking about giving the biochar a head start by mixing it with nutrient-rich materials before you add it to the soil. Things like compost, worm castings, or even compost tea. This helps to introduce those beneficial microbes and nutrients.
Right.
And makes the biochar even more welcoming to plant roots.
So it's like we're giving those microbes a little housewarming party.
Exactly. It's a simple step, but it can make a big difference.
Okay, I like that. So we've got our application rate, we've got our mixing technique, we've got our little housewarming party for the microbes. Anything else?
Well, just remember that even with all these techniques, biochar can affect soil pH.
Right.
Some types can raise it, some can lower it. So regular soil testing is still important.
Okay, can't forget about the fundamentals.
Exactly. Biochar is a great tool, but it's not a substitute for good gardening practices.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap things up, is there anything else we should keep in mind as we embark on our biochar adventures?
One thing I always like to emphasize is that biochar is a long-term investment.
Okay.
You're not going to see dramatic changes overnight.
Yeah, that's true with a lot of things in gardening.
Right. It's a gradual process.
Yeah.
You're building soil health and resilience over time.
So patience is key.
Exactly. Just like with any aspect of gardening.
All right, I have to say I'm feeling really good about incorporating biochar into my own garden.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, we've learned so much in this deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, from the science to the myths to the practical application.
But remember, this is just the beginning.
Right.
The world of biochar is constantly evolving.
Yes.
There's new research, new discoveries all the time.
It's exciting.
It is. So experiment, observe, have fun,
Yeah.
and keep learning.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. We've armed you with the knowledge.
Now go forth and make some biochar magic.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.